I always find it interesting that whenever Congress does something, ever so rarely, that benefits working people or low-income people, there is an uproar. Oh, my God, you're helping young people. You're helping working people. You're helping poor people. What a terrible thing to do.
Hello and welcome to What the F*** Just Happened Today, your essential guide to the daily shock and awe in national politics. I'm Joe Amditis. Let's get to it. It's Wednesday, September 14th, 2022. Welcome to day 603. Joe Biden approved the first $900 million in U.S. funding to build EV charging stations in 35 states. The bipartisan infrastructure bill, which Congress approved in November, allocated $7.5 billion to build a national electric vehicle charging network. By 2030, Biden wants 50% of all new vehicles sold in the United States to be electric or plug-in hybrid electric models, and 500,000 new EV charging stations. Quote, America is confronting the climate crisis with American workers leading the way, Biden said. It used to be to buy an electric vehicle, you had to make all sorts of compromises. Not now, it's all changing. Today, if you want an electric vehicle with a long range, you can buy one made in America, end quote. Meanwhile, Amtrak says it's shutting down all long-distance passenger trains in the light of a possible freight rail strike. The majority of Amtrak routes operate on tracks owned by freight railroads. Amtrak trains that operate between Washington, D.C. and Boston, however, would not be affected because Amtrak owns most of those tracks. The two unions representing the engineers and conductors who make up the two-person crews on each freight train are demanding changes to the scheduling rules that keep them on call every day they're not at work and penalize them for going to routine doctor visits or responding to family medical emergencies. Negotiators are facing a deadline of 12:01 a.m. on Friday Eastern Time to avoid a shutdown. Moving on, the EPA Inspector General's office is investigating the water crisis in Jackson, Mississippi, where roughly 150,000 residents have been under a boil water advisory for 7 weeks. The city issued a boil water advisory after finding cloudiness in the water that could cause illness. The office issued a memo saying it will look into the federal response as well as city and state officials. The current crisis began when heavy rains caused the Pearl River to flood and overwhelmed the water treatment facility, which was already using backup pumps because the pumps at the main water treatment facility were already damaged. Back in D.C., Marco Rubio says he'll co-sponsor Lindsey Graham's bill to ban abortions across the nation after 15 weeks, which has received a tepid response from Republicans who say they prefer this to be dealt with at the state level. In Indiana, the first new abortion ban passed by a state legislature since the overturning of Roe v. Wade in June will take effect on Thursday. The West Virginia Republican majority legislature, meanwhile, passed a near-total abortion ban. Under that new measure, rape and incest victims could obtain abortions at up to 8 weeks of pregnancy, but only if they report to law enforcement first. And in Texas, the state delayed publication of its study on pregnancy-related deaths until after the midterm elections and the state's upcoming legislative session. The delay means lawmakers likely won't be able to use the data until 2025. The most recent state-level data available is 9 years old. Moving on, the special counsel appointed by the Trump administration to examine the origins of the Russia investigation appears to be winding down after 3 years. The federal grand jury that John Durham used to hear evidence for his investigation has expired, and there are no plans to revive it. Durham and his team are working to complete a final report by the end of the year, which will be up to Attorney General Merrick Garland to decide whether to make its findings public. In 2019, then Attorney General William Barr tapped Durham to review the FBI's Russia probe, and Barr later upgraded Durham to a special counsel status shortly before the 2020 election, ensuring that Durham's work would continue after Trump left office. And finally, House lawmakers proposed bipartisan legislation to reform the Electoral Count Act of 1887, the first major legislative response to the January 6th attack on the Capitol. The bill is called the Electoral Count Reform and Presidential Transition Improvement Act, and it is similar to the bipartisan effort in the Senate to clarify the limited role of the vice president in certifying the election results. It raises the threshold for members of Congress to object to states' presidential electors, and it promotes an orderly presidential transition. That's all for now. You can find the links and sources for all of these stories on the main website, And as always, visit whatthefuckjusthappenedtoday.com for the latest news and headlines. Until next time, I'm Joe Amditas.